Welcome, busy gamers. Today we're going to be talking about Inkbound. What's good, what's bad, and that all important question, is it worth your time? Now, Inkbound is a turn-based action roguelike that is developed and published by Shiny Shoe, who are the makers of the critically acclaimed and popular game Monster Train. In Inkbound, the magic of the written word comes to life, as anything and everything is made throughout the story, and the ink that pens its words. You're going to be starting as a needless, a non-verbal blob of ink with a malleable form that can take on different and powerful aspects along with your Kwill companion. This is basically a floating, glowing pen nib. As the story unfolds, you're going to be working out of a library-style hub with a diverse cast of characters that will give you quests, encouragements, and occasionally constructive criticism, as the ever-locked door of the Inkbound remains mysteriously closed. Are they really toiling away to any benefit back there, and who has seen or spoken to them recently? Your work in the game is going to consist of gathering ink, which is collected through corrupted stories and enemies. But the magical library of the Atheneum creates and contains all the stories that have ever been written, meaning the game is ever expanding, and with each new book they add comes a whole new world for which you can explore, and has new sets of environments, enemies, challenges, and characters that await you. There are currently 6 aspects or classes to choose from each time you play. 3 of them are going to be unlocked to start the game, and the other 3 are unlockable essentially via some short quests that will present themselves in the first few hours of your gameplay. The game also boasts a multiplayer mode allowing players to drop in and out of a team-based run, and sets up something that you can do with friends or use the quick find feature to find a party. There are also leaderboards and challenge runs. These are separated out based on whether you are running alone or based on the total number of members in your party. Overall, solid turn-based combat here with some action-oriented movement to it, which we can talk about further in a moment. At the time of this review, though, I have played Inkbound for about 16 hours. I've reached the challenge rank 7 so far, and I believe that I've gotten the hang of the overall strategies. I've primarily played and focused on solo aspects, though I have completed several multiplayer runs, and I've explored both damage dealing and support style builds in that format. I'll put an early run on the first or second challenge level in the background of this video to highlight some fun that I have with the Weaver aspect. So what is good about Inkbound? I mentioned the 6 aspects or classes earlier, but they're worth going into more detail here for the good. Each aspect feels and plays really differently strategically, and in-game unlocks aren't aspect-based, so it's very easy to change aspects between runs. I shouldn't just focus on the variety of those aspects though, because each aspect does seem to be pretty well crafted and it aligns well with the theme that it establishes. So let's go ahead and break down a few of my favorites to illustrate. The Weaver is my favorite class. It's interesting and it's complicated aspect that gains benefits based on attaching threads to enemies. As it builds up these threaded connections, they're going to be able to pull enemies together, burn enemies to apply elemental effects, meaning getting rid of those threads to do so, or they can reduce the incoming damage they take based on how many connections they have. There's a lot to this class overall. It leans towards the support side probably, but with a little evasive and some good thread management, they're a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. Now, if you're looking for something that's a little more all-in on the damage, the Moss Cloak is your all-in damage class. It's got an excellent amount of mobility. It can dash around the battlefield, marking enemies, which will apply additional damage when you hit them, or additional damage. It will also be building up shurikens during that, so you can unleash this devastating attack with a lot of shurikens thrown, especially if you combine it with some crit items and a well-timed mark. Keep in mind with this particular class, while it has that great range and mobility that I'm talking about, it's really easy to lose out in the early game before you've built a way to mitigate damage appropriately. Now, the Obelisk is the other side of the coin from the Moss Cloak. It has lower damage output and way lower mobility, but it does have the ability to attack and deal damage across the entire battlefield, and it's pretty tanky overall, which makes it an excellent choice for applying status effects to a wide variety and a wide array of enemies. I found that it kind of struggled in solo play, but it was a pretty good support character in the multiplayer mode. All right, moving on, the game really shines in the tactical decision making that is needed throughout combat. It balances a good amount of damage output versus damage avoidance, and enemies all behave differently. Some are going to be charging across the field, leaving these huge swaths of damage in their wake. Some are going to be creating pools of damage or AoE effects that surround them, and some attack you directly. You're also going to be having orbs that spawn on the battlefield. These are going to reduce your skills cooldowns, and they'll add will to you, which allows you to perform more attacks or actions on your turn. You do have to be careful though, as you're limited on the amount of movement that you can do throughout this entire process, and attacking or interacting with something like an orb is immediately going to eat up your movement, potentially stranding you in a bad situation. You can see all of the things that are going to happen early on, and so there's kind of a puzzle to where do you position your character to do damage, but also then not to take too much damage at the end of the day when you have finalized your turn. This flows really well into another positive for Inkbound for me. This is the way it deals with kind of the timing mechanic or the timer mechanic, keeping you from basically just playing the avoidance or endurance game, and you eventually get down to vanquishing some ink monsters. Each turn, the circular area around you that you have to move around in as an arena, a fighting area, it's going to be closing slightly with encroaching ink. While you can still use that space, starting your turn in those zones and triggering actions in there is going to be causing significant levels of damage to your character. I found that to be really interesting. We also have a pretty solid basis for multiplayer in this game. If you've watched some of my videos in the past, I typically only choose to play multiplayer when I've got time set up with friends or to explore a game for implementation and review. So for me, it's a pretty big statement to say that I continued to spin up multiplayer games long after I felt like it was needed for this particular review. And while it does lock you into a game, a few of my teammates were prone to AP, or analysis paralysis. The overall experience was pretty smooth. I also felt that with the health of the enemies going up to increase the difficulty, the overall difficulty went down, especially in teams where all parties took advantage of the ability to trade vestiges or powers throughout the game. You were able to take simultaneous actions, and there were a lot of good and fun builds that you could play, even if you were doing a support style build, which I do believe is somewhat essential for a group to function. Those support style builds can focus on orb generation, allowing other people to take more actions or more powerful actions, reducing their cooldowns. Also enemy pulling and grouping, getting them all into one space so that people can really unleash damage on a wide variety of enemies at the same time. Those are all things that I thought were good, and the multiplayer did quite well. There's one more minor plus before we go over to the negatives. I do like the way the milestones and victory boards are laid out and implemented. Along with the quest system, it gives you a pretty fair amount, a high and fair amount of content to push forwards to, and it will be easy for them to expand on as the game continues to develop. Okay, so what is bad about Inkbound? Now, we're going to say the books or the worlds that you interact with and explore are primarily aesthetics. They have no real depth compared to roguelikes with branching pathways that are laid out for you to choose from. And when I say they have no depth compared to those things, they're essentially the exact same thing as that. It's just you get to walk in between point A and point B instead of just clicking that. So you're going to be entering a book, you're going to walk a few feet, possibly breaking an object or two for coins. Depending on the book that you are reading, that could be a target dummy, that could be a pile of cloth, that could be a chest. But the only thing that's happening is you're getting a few coins or something of that nature. Then you're going to be potentially pulling up a fish with a single mouse click, and then you'll walk into a circle and you'll trigger a fight. Occasionally, there aren't even any chests or fish or anything like that in between where you start and where you click the fight. Sometimes it looks like there are side pathways, which early on I was excitedly walking down, hoping to find, well, something. But there was never anything down those pathways. The story on this game is also going to go as a negative for me. It's fairly weak, and it's really sparse to say the least. I hope they add more to this, they flesh it out a little bit more. There's clearly something there, and there are definitely characters that have potential, but overall it is revealed way too slowly, and many of the reveals don't really amount to something that for me felt worth the wait. Okay, we will take 3 last little negatives in rapid fashion. Balance is constantly improving. It is a early access game, but one of the main items I still notice is that it appears damage types aren't really created equal. Poison and burn seem much more consistent for runs than something like a frostbite or physical combination. Cosmetics and the pass in this particular game are very expensive for what you get, with the free version of the pass giving very, very little at all, and the other version being around $8 after you have already paid for the game. Overall, if you spend a lot of time in it, I don't have a problem with that, and it can be earned in some cases with in-game currency. But overall, unless I see improvement on this as the game develops, I think it has poor value, especially if you have already paid for that game. Okay, hopefully a rare issue. I did experience a few days of interruption while playing this game and working on the review. I probably would have actually spent a few more hours on it, but one of the hosted servers was down. It caused issues across the board, including poor inconsistent loading times just to enter the game at all, as well as issues loading slowly and incorrectly when I chose books or pathways. I will note that this only occurred for 2 or 3 days, and outside of that period, the game was largely smooth and lag-free. So hopefully this is not something that you experience, but it was something that negatively impacted my play. Okay, we'll move on to the final score here. This is a tough one for me. I'm going to go ahead and give Inkbound a 6. It is a good, not great game. For a few reasons. It is extraordinarily fun early on, and exploring those different classes is something that I really, really enjoyed. Unfortunately, after you get past playing all 6 of those and unlocking all of their quests, there's not an actual large variety in between builds for a specific class. So if I play the Weaver, for example, there's not a lot for me to do that's different in between runs. I can try a few different things, but there are clearly some best possible choices, and I think you're going to find out what those are and gravitate towards them pretty quickly. I went from not being able to clear challenge 1 or challenge 2 all the way up to 7, winning games back to back to back to back after I felt like a few things clicked into place. There's also just a few overall balance issues that I mentioned earlier, and that takes this game from great to good. As it moves through early access, I think this thing has a ton of potential, and I hope this is something that is on my PC in a year. That has been my review of Inkbound. I hope you've all gotten something out of this. If you like this, please feel free to go ahead and give me a like, a subscription, or a comment. I love hearing the feedback, and having feedback is a great reason for me to do this. It keeps me encouraged, keeps me going. Until next time, have a great time gaming.